How we all diddling YouTube? It's me, Pominors, back with our Sunday preview of the AFL games with my tips and a little bit of analytical data to get our teeth in. It's game day if you're a Carlton fan like myself, so we're just recording this an hour before bounce, so I'm super excited for the game and I'm super excited for my season to start personally. I hope your season has gone well. We're currently 100% if you'd count a draw as a split. So that is really good at the moment. We've had a lot of fun this week. So tippings are looking good. So if you are new to the channel, please like and subscribe. That really does help us out. And first up, Sunday, which is GWS versus North Melbourne. It's a really tight one, this one. And it's a game that's really interesting. There's a lot of subplots when you look at it. And if you look at the two teams as they pop up now, you've got GWS. They're an 84 rated team by our system. And you can see here that North Melbourne are an 82. What is interesting about this is it's not as foregone as you can think. If you actually look at the makeup when you include the followers, Melbourne have a real strong following outfit, especially with Goldstein. He's very dominant when he plays one-on-one. And if you look here as well, the forward line of Melbourne is rated as an 81 versus an 82 of GWS. Not much to choose from. The midfield, as we said, is actually in favour of North. And then you've got the forward line of GWS, which we know is very potent, containing players like Jezza Cameron. You're always in with a shout. Kelly across half forward, up against an 81 defence. Really interesting because when we look at the key battles here, you've got Cameron, Whitfield, Davis and Haynes are the players that TPI is indicating will need to have good games, step up and dictate the influence. Whereas on Melbourne's case, North Melbourne's case, it's Ben Brown, Pittard, who's got the tough job at the moment on Kelly, Goldstein and Tarrant. And obviously Tarrant's going to have to stop Cameron. But also if Goldstein gets on top of Sam Jacob, they're going to get a lot of first use. And we know Cunnington and Higgins, they're very good users of the ball and really get the chains moving, as they showed in the second half against St Kilda. If we look at the analytical data in the last 10 games, we can see why TPI is predicting a very close game in team matchups. It's 74 average points scored for GWS versus 81 for North Melbourne. Average points against is actually 77 for GWS versus 73 for North Melbourne. So it's a very, very neck and neck game. And when we look at the winning percentage at this venue, it's 80% for GWS in the last 10 matches here versus 100% for North Melbourne. So it really is actually saying from an analytical side that North Melbourne should be the favourites for this game. The forward line, though, is a really important factor. And when we look at these kind of matchups, forward lines do win your matches when there is such a margin as there is. And when we look back at the data, there is a large advantage in the statistical formula for GWS. The projected score for this one is actually 82 to GWS versus 60 for North Melbourne. And that works out as a win percentage based on 1,000 times played in the simulation with an 87 win percentage for GWS. There's an 87% chance of them winning. And I can't look beyond that. I think even though it's tight in the TPI data, when you've actually run this as a simulation, there's a clear winner. 82% means you are stupid to back anything else. So I am 100% backing GWS with 100% confidence. I think it'll be a great game though. I love watching GWS and I actually think, and I agree with TPI on this, in a shortened format, GWS are one of the most fearful teams in this shortened quarter format of AFL. I think it should be a really exciting game and I expect them to be really, really hard pressed not to win the minor premiership. Up next on Sunday at just after 3:30 is Sydney versus Essendon. And if you're a Carlton fan like me, you'll be a Swans fan for the Arvo. Now when we look at the TPI data as the matchups come up, we can see 83 plays 82 in Sydney's favour. Their defence has got a staggering 83 out of 100 rating versus the forward line of 82 of Essendon. Midfield, not much to choose from. 84 versus 83 to Essendon. And the forward line versus defence, 81 for Sydney's forward line versus the 80 defence of Essendon. And it's a really tight matchup. And when we look at the little idiosyncrasies and the matchups that are important, Dane Rampy, Nick Blakey, Oliver Florent and Tom Papley are the key performers that TPI will be saying need to really be above where they usually are to win the game and get the job done. I think Nick Blakey's going to have a really good game this as well. I really do favour his style of football and I really think he's matched up. I think his matchup is really good on this one. We can see Essendon there looking at the package, Tom Bell-Chambers, Dylan Shiel and Kyle Hooker. Now, Bell-Chambers is a really interesting one. Callum Sinclair is the ruck for this one. And it is a good matchup for Bell-Chambers. Sinclair's probably got his edge around the ground, but you'd say one-on-one ruck work, you would favour Bell-Chambers. And if he can get a lot of first ball to players like Dylan Shiel, we know how damaging Essendon can be on the outside. Stringers Mercurial, he's a bit like all them players that you just love to watch. He can be rubbish 1 minute, but when he has 5 minutes, that 5 minutes takes the game away. And Hooker will have a big responsibility really keeping that back line quiet. We know he loves to peel off and look for the intercept mark. Sydney are very wasteful inside 50. When we look at the small indicators over 10 games, not much to separate the two sides. 77 average points scored in the last 10 games for Sydney versus 74 for Essendon. Points against, though, shows that Essendon's backline is very vulnerable. We know Sydney are always very defensively sound under Longmuir. 89 points conceded for Essendon versus the only 72 for Sydney. Very stringent down the back. When we look at win percentages at the SCG in their last 10 games played, Sydney have a 50% win percentage versus 0 at Essendon. Essendon struggle in Sydney. And when we look at TPI, what it's predicting, it is saying there is a 49% chance that Essendon win versus a 51% of Sydney. It is too close to call. It is 71 playing 68 is the average score. It's a very tight game. I'm going to stick with TPI on this one though. I do think Sydney will get up, but I think it will be tight. And honestly, when TPI is saying anything less than 60%, I'm always very wary on when it's too close to call. But I think with that home record, I think Sydney are going to get up. And the final game is my wife's beloved team, St Kilda versus the Doggies. Now the Bulldogs, they're a really interesting prospect, and TPI froths the Bulldogs, and I'll tell you why. If we look at this, the overall ratings for both teams, 81 for St Kilda out of 100 versus 83 for the Doggies out of 100, and that's based on their best 18 that are playing at the moment. You've got the 79 defensive rating for St Kilda versus an 81 of the forward line. Not much to choose from. Midfield and followers, Rowan Marshall dictates the way, and Steele and Billings, there's a lot of talent in that midfield at St Kilda. 85 versus 87 for Western Bulldogs. And then the forward line, 80 for St Kilda versus 80 in the back line at the Doggies. And it's really interesting when we look at the key performers. Rowan Marshall, Jack Steele, Hunter Clark and Gresham are there for St Kilda. And you can see why, because if you look on the other side, Tim English is on there. It's the battle of the rucks, this one. Then midfield has the ability to crush each team. We saw it with St Kilda when they're on song in the first half. In the last round games, North Melbourne, they were absolutely dominant and they controlled the game very well. Steele is very effective at stopping players playing as well. And you can see there, Steele and Marcus Bontempelli, again, mentioned. And I think it's going to be an intriguing one, this one. I really do favour Rowan Marshall against Tim English. I don't know why, but I really like how Rowan Marshall goes. I know he's been compared to players like Polly Farmer. I think that's a bit of a stretch at the moment. But he is a phenomenal ruckman. There is no getting away from it. He's also got that wonderful adversary now in Paddy Ryder, who is an absolute phenomenal bull. He can rest in the forward line. It gives Rowan Marshall a chance to rest a bit more for longevity, and it should be intriguing. There's also the Josh Bruce factor in this one, and there is no statistical data that backs it up. But for some reason, when an ex-player comes to an ex-club, they go off. Josh Bruce apart though, let's look at some statistical data that we can verify. We've got St Kilda, their average points are 75 points for versus 90 of the Doggies. Average points against, 88 for St Kilda versus 79 for the Doggies. And also the win percentage at Marvel Stadium, 50% for St Kilda. Very tight though, 60% for the Doggies. And that, when we run it through the system and look through the pluses and cons, gives an 83-point victory to 65 for St Kilda. That basically works out at a 71% win percentage for the Doggies based on 1,000 games. It seems that I'm going to have to back TPA again on this one, and I'm backing the Doggies for this one. I think it's just a bridge too far, even for Ratton and his men, St Kilda. And as much as I'd love to tip St Kilda, I'm going to have to stick with the system on this one. They're my tips for this week's fixtures. I hope you have a lot of fun with your tipping. I hope your team goes really well as well. I'll be back again next week to preview the games, and next week we'll do a bit of a recap of the week, some funny things that I've seen. And as always, guys, have a wonderful weekend. Stay safe. Pom out.